from the Thrones come out. You likely haven't seen much of it, maybe a
I was
few.
trying to read it, but it was hard.
One of the things is recall legislation, and last week at IGA we were thinking MLAs, and that's what everybody thought, and now it comes today, every elected official in the province. Your thoughts on it?
You know, I'm kind of shrugging my shoulders at it. It makes sense in many ways, but the trick with this is where you set the threshold. In these really polarized political times, if you set the threshold too low and people are forever at the risk of recall, it can take away their ability to have political courage. So if you want to say something really right or really left, and you know that that's going to irritate some of your constituents, but you think it's the right thing to do, you don't want to forever be at the risk of being recalled just because someone doesn't like you or they didn't like how you voted on something. However, if you set the bar too high, then it's just saying it to say you did it. If you set it at a rate where no one could ever actually achieve that level of signatures, then what's the point? Ultimately, our democracy works pretty well, and the best recall is we got an election every 4 years.
I mean, we have recall in BC, and it's been used,
I don't know if it's
times?
ever successfully been used,
Like,
has
didn't
it?
they get rid of Bill Vanderzam, or did he had other issues too?
I don't know if it was recall. Gosh, that was a long time ago. But you know, the point being that either it never ever has been used, or it's only been used in certain very high profile cases. It doesn't really help if you really have a councillor who, or a mayor, or an MLA who is doing something very wrong. It really doesn't make a difference. And we have to remember that the way that our society works is the consent of the loser. So in other words, we have elections, and then we actually let the elected people do their job, even if we didn't vote for them. And it's okay to have recall to get in cases when people have really stepped out of line or broken all their campaign promises or turned out to be someone completely different. But there are other mechanisms for that as well, like our code of conduct, and certainly all the conversations we've been having over the last couple of weeks.
Councillor Sutherland was just here and mentioned he's in favor of recall, but then now he's concerned a bit because he's been vocal on some issues here about privatization at the waste, contracting out the golf courses. He's worried about what's to stop the unions from showing up in his ward and knocking on doors and having a petition going.
I think he suddenly realized the difference between ideology and reality.
What does that mean?
Well, it's okay to say you're in favor of something, but then when you realize, how would that actually work? Oh, wait a minute. Well, there we are.
It also looks like in the throne speech they talked about an initiative that will allow Albertans to put issues to a referendum. I'm not quite sure whether that would just be a provincial referendum or if that would also talk about city issues.
We actually have that provision in place now for voters to force a plebiscite on issues. So that's already in place for the municipality. I imagine what they're looking at is mirroring that for the province.
Okay, makes sense.
Do you worry that, like, the city's threshold for a plebiscite is pretty high?
Yes.
Do you worry the province may, if they want to see some referendums, may lower the bar?
Yeah, you got to be really thoughtful about that because you don't want to run into a world like California where it actually becomes extremely hard to govern because you have citizen initiatives all the time. But certainly you want to be open to citizen initiatives. And I think the system that the city's got in place now is a good one.
Are you satisfied with where things landed with the motion to try to limit FCM attendance? Obviously that piece got voted down.
You know what? If we had said 5 members of FCM or 5 members of council could attend, that would certainly be something I would have looked at. I think 1 is way too restrictive, and I think ultimately members of council need to get better at their jobs and need to do some of that learning. Does it have to be 10 every year? No, I don't think so. So there might have been a more reasonable mid-path, but the mover didn't look for that. He looked for a bit of a more extreme answer. Ultimately, though, limiting the expenses and prohibiting the spending on alcohol, which we did do today, I think that makes a ton of sense. And by the way, years ago I tried to remove the ability to expense alcohol, and we ended up with sort of a midway solution because council at the time wouldn't agree with that. But if that is council's will, then we should do it not just for FCM, but more broadly.
Yeah, because that was just to prohibit alcohol expensing at FCM.
Yeah, what it really was we're looking at that's what we passed yesterday, that we're looking at creating different policies. And what this notice of motion was sort of a stopgap to deal with FCM while those other policies are being written. And those other policies, I imagine, would supersede this when they're done.
Is there a reason that the broader ban wasn't brought in today? Did just no one make
No, we talked about it yesterday, and the thought really was, rather than pick away at this piecemeal, why don't we just do the whole policy revision together? And we directed that work yesterday.
You mentioned in there that the sort of, I guess, taking away at elected officials and their conduct was bothering you today. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Ultimately, at some point, we have to trust people to be professionals, and we have code of conduct rules in place to prevent people from straying too far to the lines, and I believe in that a lot. But to say to everyone, anytime you go to AUMA in Edmonton on a Thursday, you've got to come and do a book report in front of council, it's a bit weird for me. And I think there should be reporting. I think people should talk about what they learned. But what this motion was calling for was every single member of council coming in a public meeting of council and spending time saying what I did when I was at this conference. And at some point we got to go, these folks are professionals. We have to trust them to do their jobs. They're ultimately accountable to the citizens that voted for them. And there are ways to get that information without this sort of public process that the motion called for. Again, the motion went to a pretty extreme place where it probably could have achieved a lot more success had it been a more moderate, thoughtful way to go.
Like a briefing note from councillors that went to IGA.
Yeah, right. Or even file your report with your expenses on what you did and what you learned. I think that'd be okay too.
Is the $3,000 spending limit realistic?
It's it's similar to the average in Quebec City. Quebec City, for me, was very expensive because we booked our flights late and the flights were really expensive. Certainly flights between Calgary and Toronto, which is where the next FCM are, will be cheaper, but of course the hotel costs and the registration costs will be greater. So probably $3,000 is reasonable, but it's probably something that we'll need to revisit as we go forward.